Hello and welcome. You're viewing the Citizens Journalist podcast, Mesa County Compass, that brings you the news that you can use from a different point of view. I'm Ruth.
I'm Lisa.
And together we are Mesa County Compass. Our goal is to create an informed, current, active citizenry armed with the facts. We will be covering what's new to you, what it means to you, what you can do about it, and provide you access to the decision makers when we can. Good afternoon. Welcome to Mesa County Compass. Today we have Diane Schwenke, who is the past CEO and chair of the Grand Junction Chamber of Commerce, who is now doing advocacy work. Oh my goodness, I can't pronounce that. Anyway, for different businesses here in town. So anyway, welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
Glad to have you aboard.
Thank you.
Yep. And this is a pick your brain session.
Okay,
so
sounds great.
Just have lots and lots and lots of questions.
Alrighty,
so
yeah.
Just give us a little bit of background about yourself, your family and what you did with the chamber and when you retired and how you started this.
Sure. And I tell people I was the Chamber of Commerce director since dinosaurs roamed the valley, because I represented the Grand Junction Area Chamber as the CEO for over 30 years. And my passion has been, supporting small local businesses, and really, I just so admire business owners who are willing to go out there and put their life savings into a dream that serves the rest of the community. So for me, it was work, but it wasn't work. I retired 2 years ago, and like all retirees, I started a consulting business, laughingly. But the reality is that now I do advocacy work for the Grand Junction Area Realtors Association and the Home Builders of Western Colorado. And I actually even work with the Glenwood Springs Realtor Association on some of their governmental affairs things as well. Okay. So again, in being an advocate for small businesses, I determined early on that, the old adage, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, really applies here in the Valley. So I was very active with the local city council in Mesa County, and even on a statewide basis on legislation that impacted businesses. And so I became kind of a political junkie. And so that was the part that I actually missed the most for the first 6 months after I retired. So I'm glad to kind of be back working in that space.
Very good. Gives you a little freedom to come and go as you please. Little freedom.
Yes, it does. Well, and there's Wi-Fi anywhere. So it's like I'm sitting on a ship, but I'm happy to participate in a Zoom call with the city of Grand Junction. So
Yeah. So what were some of the things that you thought really made a difference during your tenure on Chamber that were good for the community, and then how have you seen the community changing?
So here's one of the things that we did early on in the Chamber is that we invited elected officials, so city council members, to sit down with leadership from the Chamber board who were leaders in business on a regular basis, like once a quarter. Same for the county, same for the school district, because at the end of the day, we should all be pulling in the same direction. If you're going to have a vibrant community, one that's economically viable, one that puts people to work and they can afford homes, you got to have players sitting around a table and having a discussion and throwing out ideas and collaborating with each other. And I think that was probably one of the big things that I felt like I brought to the table in terms of getting people around a table to seek solutions. And frankly, that is one of the things now that disappoints me, particularly at this point when it comes to city council, some of the actions that the city is taking in terms of housing, which is where I spend a lot of my time these days, and other things. It's like no one entity has all the answers and all the solutions, and we're just much better as a community if we all sit down and plan together. And I don't think we're doing that.
No, we are not by any means.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't feel like their voices are heard anymore. And I don't know, I would say 10 years ago, most people didn't worry about what city council was doing because they felt like they were doing their job. And it seems like their role, not necessarily that what the charter says has changed, but how they see what they do has changed.
Exactly. I mean, I've had this discussion in some other places lately. It's like, what's the role of local government? What do you look to local government to do for you? Well, we want you to keep us safe, so police and fire. We want streets to drive on because that's not something the private sector can provide. And, honestly, and then maybe some public, health and safety type things in terms of some regulations that keep everybody safe. But at the end of the day, that's what local government is supposed to do. And if you look at what's happened is now we have government that does so much more. And so like the city of Grand Junction has added over 150 new employees in the last 5 years. Now, some of them are new fire department employees because of the stations, but not all of them. And so, they have 4 people now in a communications department that tells us what they're doing, supposedly.
Tells us what we need to be thinking. I'm sorry, I have to interject that.
Right, but we've got 4 people in a housing department, and it's like we have very robust nonprofits here in terms of Catholic outreach and Habitat for Humanity, and we have good nonprofits that were operating in that space. That now the city of Grand Junction has a department stood up that those funds that are going to salaries could be going to programming. And so all of a sudden we've expanded a bunch. And in terms of...
And how did that happen?
Yeah. Honestly, I think a lot has to do, and we all know this, with who you elect. And the other thing that's been interesting is what kind of staff you have on board. And I've been around long enough that I've kind of seen this pendulum swing. And I remember there was a period in the early 2000s when we had a planning department that was frankly atrocious. And at the end of the day, we got together. The city council at that point said, "We hear you, we see a problem." And we had a city manager who also said we should be open for business. And they turned that. And so we, 2010, we're going right along. And then I see this emerging again. Staff is leading the whole, staff is leading. City council, for whatever reason, I don't feel like really exerts their full representation of the citizens. And so we've got some dysfunction going on now. And again, I joke with some of the others that are on various boards, but it's like, now it's all, this was in the comp plan. I mean, how many times have you heard the staff go, "We're bringing this forward because this was in the comp plan.
And this is what the people want."
And this is what the people wanted. And I'm like, I was on the comp plan steering committee. And honestly, yes, we wanted a walkable community, but we didn't say that involves shutting down street lanes or putting a lot more on a developer of a housing subdivision to provide it by fees. I mean, so, it's really interesting to me that they pull out pieces of the comp plan and say, this is what they meant. And again, we were talking earlier, but, we sat down with Mike Bennett, who is right now the Fruita city manager and is going to be the city manager in Grand Junction. And he was talking about their comp plan and how that had everybody going in the same direction. And he goes, so when we did that in the city of Fruita, we had 4,000 people providing meaningful engagement. And to me, the word was meaningful. And what I see now is we check a box. We set up a booth at Farmers Market.
Well, and it's pop-up. That makes me nuts because pop-up, by definition, means I'm not telling you ahead of time it's coming.
Right.
And so
kind of like a pop quiz in school.
Yeah.
Panic.
But I mean, if you go back even to the sustainability and adaptable plan, it's like we were down at the farmers market, so we count everybody who says hi to us at the booth, and that's engagement. That's not engagement.
It's not engagement.
It's not meaningful engagement. And so I really feel like there is a huge, even though we have a communications department and we're paying 4 people out of our sales tax dollars, that we don't have communication. Those lines are broken. And in order to have meaningful communication, you have to be willing to listen to each other. Right. And you have to be willing to say, okay, I hear you. How can we get to a point where we all get something out of this? Right. And it's not, now it's more of it's my way or the highway, not how can we all move forward together, which frankly is deeply disturbing to me.
That's been very frustrating for so many of us because we have been at these meetings since 4th and 5th Street became a reality, so to speak. We've been at those meetings over and over and over again, and we find that everything was decided the Monday before the Wednesday meeting as to how they're going to act and react, and they actually seem to be told what they're going to say at these meetings. It just, now.
It wasn't even that. Dennis Simpson had told us that when the city brings a plan, when the staff brings the plan, he says we have two choices. It's up or down. It's not, well, we'd like more information on this. And one thing that really bothers me is how often they feel like they need an outside company to do a study. I think, can you not go talk to people?
We have intelligent people right here in this valley that can take care of things.
Here's my question, and I think Councilman Kennedy actually told me he asked for a list of all the consulting firms and how much they're being paid. And I'm like, how much are we paying for people like the Lotus Company to come in and
with
develop the boutique consulting firm and give us the sustainability and adaptable plan? And I had the same experience this morning because I was like, I wonder how much we're paying the firm that's coming in and doing the Nexus study for the impact fees. And so I'm like, okay, it has to be on the city website somewhere. And it was a contract, so I'm assuming that it was on the consent agenda. Well, I've gone back all the way to March, and I cannot find where the city ever acted on that contract.
Really?
And I still have no idea how much money we're spending on it. Not yet.
So what's it going to take to get those figures?
A Cora request.
I was going to say, is it next Cora? Is the but that is terrible to think that we have to go Cora every time we want something from
anybody.
Yeah, anybody. I mean, it's public information. Should be public information. Yeah. And here we have to go pay money to request.
And again, I spent over an hour on the city website going, well, maybe it's under procurement. Nope. It's got. I mean, it's like, well, they had to have signed a contract, so. I'm assuming, but maybe it was just under the amount or something. I don't know. But it's like, I didn't see any, actual council approval of consultant contracts in that period, in the time from the last 6 months.
And it seems like that would be maybe something that we should just ask and say, which city councilman, because I know that Dennis Simpson really works at trying to keep it transparent. Oh, yeah. And he's a money man.
Yes.
And he says, where are we spending this money? But I know he had to do a Cora request for the expenditures from 2023. They were supposed to be, until June. He said, we still haven't gotten what we spent, so we know, what we should be looking at. And he did a Cora request for information from
Can you imagine
his own
a city
department.
council member themselves having to do that?
So again, there's this. It's like transparency is there isn't any at the end of the day, and it's like when you don't have transparency, you can't build trust, and so then you end up in this us versus them. Versus let's all sit down around a table here and figure this out.
And everybody's digging their heels in and nobody's cooperating. I mean, it's getting bad.
It's getting very bad. And 4th and 5th Street is a classic example. I mean, honestly, it's like, okay, so a bunch of people get up and say, we don't like this. And you can argue till the cows come home with regard to whatever community engagement they had prior to this. But then somebody somewhere reaches out to the bicycling community and says, hey, we need you. So then the next council meeting, you've got people that support what's happened that get up and say, we got to have this. And it's like, no. Let's figure this out. There's got to be a better way. Let's actually open this back up and have some conversation and look at how we can accommodate everybody. But that doesn't happen.
I think that the people here are smart enough to figure out that there is a way that we can do this to make everybody happy. And it could be as bad as the downtown people don't want to think about this. The third and the fifth, or third and sixth should be the ones designated for bikers, because it's actually the more quiet, the less used by the vehicles, even though it doesn't have any stoplights, as we were told by Trent Paul. That
Frankly, in my view, you don't have a speedway going through downtown if you have stoplights every block.
Right.
And so if you've got a speedway, one way to increase the safety is modify the timing of the streetlights. Has anybody thought about that?
Right.
Because you've got those.
Well, and my main problem, today I was driving up First, and I thought, when you have First, it does have that bicycle lane all the way up.
Right.
But you don't have the parking. So it works.
Yeah.
To just have the car and the bicycle lane. Fourth and fifth doesn't work with the idea that we're going to have parking, we're going to have a bicycle lane, we're going to have one lane of traffic, and we're going to have people trying to use a business.
Right. And you realize that they're basing their active corridor and some of these on the stress level for the bicyclists.
I did. And they want to have it all down to a number 1 instead of a 4
or a 5. It should be a 1. And I mean, it's like, what kind of engineer comes up with a terminology that it's stress level? And I mean, I heard Trent talk about it the other night on the 7th Street corridor as well. It's like, it's the stress level. Well, let's talk about the stress level of the people who are actually paying for that pavement, which is you and I with our gas tax. Right. So, it's to a point where something really truly needs to change. And I believe the pendulum does swing, and I think we will get there. But
so what are the best ways to get there?
So honestly, even though it's frustrating as heck, people have to keep showing up. Bobby Daniels a year or so ago said, regardless of how you feel about the Daily Sentinel, it's our public square. So letters to the editor and use edits and showing up. I mean, I've never been more frustrated with a city council than I was last fall when we filled the auditorium with builders and developers and realtors around the transportation and engineering design standards and said, let's pull this back. Let's do a cost analysis of how this is going to affect affordable housing. And the answer was no, we're going to adopt it and we're moving forward. But as frustrating as that is, I still think there's value in city council looking out and seeing a bunch of people in the audience, and I applaud anyone who gets up on the public comments or in the public hearings. At least it's on the record, and at least you're doing what you can at this point. Ultimately, it depends on the voters and elections, but in the meantime, you got to show up. You just got to keep at it, even though it drives you crazy. And again, I go to a lot of council meetings, a lot of workshops, and there are times that I just go home to my husband and go, thank God I did not get elected.
I can understand
because I wouldn't have any hair left.
Well, and again, I mean, I want to jump up when some of these arguments are being made, particularly a workshop, which they don't let you speak,
right?
Which is another thing. It's like if you're having a public meeting and all of the council people are there and they're discussing things that impact you, there should be an opportunity for you to speak at
just
that
some
meeting.
Input, not being nasty or derogatory in any way, just conversation.
Well, it's like just have a council meeting every week instead of doing this. It's like I have never, now granted, I've only lived in probably a half a dozen communities, but I've never lived in a community where the city council gets together and has a meeting and talks about all these issues and gets all this staff input. And if you, as a citizen, want to have input, you have to come back to the council meeting and 2 nights later and speak just in general public comment.
Right.
Or wait for it to come up for a yes or no vote, as Dennis has talked about. So it's like, make them all council meetings.
I kind of like that idea, too. Let's put them under fire all the time.
Well, again, the county does that. The county has meetings. They don't have workshops. They have meetings. And so I think the city should have meetings.
It's true. So to kind of get off the subject a little bit, but not really off the subject at all, the impact fees.
Ah, yes, my favorite thing that I spend hours and hours on these days. So people don't realize that up until 2003, we didn't have impact fees. So it's been 22 years. In 2003, the state legislature passed a bill that allowed for impact fees. So that's when we had our first traffic capacity payment fee that the city adopted. And then the city didn't really do anything with that. It was in place. Developers knew. Then we get to 2019. And 2019, Greg Caton, city manager at that point, came back and said, we're going to do traffic capacity payment fees, but then we're also going to look at police and fire and municipal facilities and parks. Now keep in mind that developers already have to set aside land or give a fee in lieu of park,
Right.
but now also a park fee. And so we fought that hard from the business community as a whole. And at the time, we basically did our own study. We showed how uncompetitive we would be with places like Montrose and Pueblo, cities where we might be competing for jobs. And so at the end of the day, the council did not implement a municipal facilities fee. And they gradually, over a couple of years, raised it to 75% of what the consultants had recommended. Because here's the other thing, and I heard Mayor Herman say this, which is wrong, at a recent workshop. He goes, well, that maximum fee is what we need to keep current.
Right.
It's like, no, the maximum fee is the legally defensible fee.
Before it becomes a tax.
Before you could actually challenge it for not having what they call rough proportionality to the impacts of development.
So why do we have to go all the way up to just
You
that
don't.
point?
You don't. That's the thing. You
And
don't.
why should a developer have to pay for several of the things? I mean, maybe police and fire, I can see, and maybe a little bit of maybe. But what are we paying our sales tax for if it isn't? You have more people paying sales tax, so you should have adequate amounts of money to pay for your fire and your police, and you're just saying.
Plus, we have a sales tax that's dedicated to public safety. So that's the other thing we have in place.
And that part of that sales tax, wasn't it supposed to just go for the building of the fire stations? And are they paid for? And if they're paid for, why do we still pay the tax?
Well, it was to go for the fire stations and the personnel, the ongoing personnel. And so, but same thing with police, it was to do some of these things. So again, there are guardrails that have been established around this. And there's actually been a recent Supreme Court decision around development fees, as they're called in the overall, and in terms of you cannot go overboard. Now, what I'm seeing with the city of Grand Junction currently, they've come out with their first 3 fees. So supposedly their police and fire, they're supposed to be discounting for the sales tax we're already paying. And then, but they're still recommending a minimum of 100 to 400% increase in the fees just for those 3. And I can't imagine what the because they've changed it now from traffic to multimodal, and they're looking at a linkage fee.
Right. And the linkage fee is
my next thing.
right. The big one.
The linkage fee, I have challenged all along. It's an increasing trend in the state of Colorado. There are now 10 municipalities that charge this fee for.
And what are those 10 municipalities that charge it?
They typically are the resort communities, and it started in Denver and Boulder. And what they do is they charge a per square foot fee for housing and commercial development. So if you are a job creator in the city of Grand Junction and you need to expand your facility, you will be paying a linkage fee. And so if they enact this, so basically it's a fee we charge on, as my buddy Hogan Peterson says, it's a fee we charge on new housing to make housing even more unaffordable so that the city can collect money to go out and do housing. I mean, the logic around it, and they are pointing to, well, if you bring workers into the community, you're aggravating the situation with housing, so you should be paying for it if you're a commercial or a business.
Oh my God! Now,
I know.
Yeah.
Is the word. Yeah.
that makes absolutely no sense.
No, it does not.
It's a vicious circle.
Yeah.
And it just keeps growing. And it's eating everything in its path.
Well, here's the deal.
awful.
And I mean, I have always had a problem with, in Colorado, because tax increases in taxes have to go to voters, they substitute fees.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so impact fees are basically a tax on new development.
Yes.
That's what they are. But we'll call it a fee, and
Right.
we'll develop this formula, and we'll hire a consultant, so it's legally defensible. But it's a tax, and ultimately, that is not the way you should be funding even things like affordable housing.
Right.
And what it will do, I mean, here's the other thing: is the reality is, if it becomes so expensive inside the city of Grand Junction to develop new housing, and we all agree we need more housing inventory, we won't get it if you increase the fees in the city of Grand Junction.
Well, builders will walk.
They will, and they are already walking.
Yes.
And so they may go down to Whitewater, and build
Be
there,
in the county.
or be in the county, be in Clifton. I mean, hopefully she doesn't mind if I tell her this, but Laurel Cole, Habitat for Humanity, their next project is going to be out in Clifton, not in Grand Junction.
It makes sense.
And she was asked, why is it not inside the city limits of Grand Junction? And she said, because it's so hard to develop inside the city of Grand Junction and the fees. Now, if that happens with a nonprofit that is trying to provide an affordable housing for some of our citizens, I mean, believe it or not all developers and builders are greedy and make a gazillion dollars.
Right.
But they have to make a little bit of profit, and what you do is you take away their profit, they're not going to be here.
That's exactly right. And we'll wind up with builders that come in and like they did in the late 70s and start throwing up homes.
But they can't now.
But now they can't.
They can't
Yeah,
do that because
but-
of all of the regulations. Like a friend of mine owns a construction company that does remodels and stuff, and they said when people find out maybe they want to make a little extra money by having like a mother-in-law house or converting a garage, and they can't because it is so expensive with all the fees and all the regulations that the city has put on, that they just say, never mind, but that would be another option for student housing or
But
somebody
I'm thinking outside of the city limits is what I'm thinking.
okay.
Is what's going to happen is all of this is going to go
Right, and
around.
so then we don't want urban sprawl, and we're going to end up with more urban sprawl.
We are,
Mm-hmm.
indeed.
And so it's just, and the other thing that is so hard for people to understand is which for me is not, is the more you drive up the price of a home, the more people are unable to afford a home.
Yes.
Right.
And the National Association of Home Builders has this index that they look at. And this is data that's even a year or two old. So impact fees and what they may end up are not even considered in, what the increases might be. For every $1,000 that you add to the price of a home, 81 families in Mesa County are priced out of home ownership. And if you want a strong community, you want homeowners. You want first-time homeowners. You want families owning their home. It builds wealth. It makes them connected to the community. It makes them engaged. They go out. They volunteer at their schools and other things. It makes for a healthier community. But we're not getting there. And we're not going to get there if you increase the fees to the point where a builder cannot make it pencil out. So, that...
And yet the people are screaming about the homeless situation and what are we going to do about the homeless, and yet we're causing more to become homeless all the time.
Yes, you could be. And it's like, and that's one of my frustrations with some, not all, but some elected leaders, particularly in Grand Junction, is, you know what? You need more money for another fire station or a daycare center upgrade for your employees or whatever. If you put it on the back of new homes, then you've said your priority is affordable housing. You just put that goal over to the side over here. There's a direct connection between how much you charge and how much homes are going to cost. And that is not paid for by the builder or the developer. It's paid for by the homeowner.
Right.
So
Right. They're going to pass it on.
they have to.
Yeah.
So
And yet our leaders seem to think that because we have such a beautiful area for biking and jeeping and all of that kind of stuff, that everybody will come in spite of all of this.
Well, they
what
can't
you,
afford to come.
they can't, or what you do is you end up with this, frankly, elitist community. I mean, look at some of the places in California.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so if that's your vision, that you have this place where, you know, people have to make $200,000 a year to live in this community, then that's your vision. You're on the way.
That's exactly right.
And where are those people going to work? The only thing I can see is they work remotely from another state. We don't have the infrastructure in terms of businesses that can afford to pay that type of salary that would enable anybody to live.
Well, and I mean, I'm thinking in terms of, I just came from, you know, a briefing with the school district. Where are the school teachers going to live? Where are the firefighters going to live? Where are the people that the police officers, where are the people we depend on going to live if you do this? And again, we all agree we need a supply of housing.
But they want to subsidize.
But this reminds me of Aspen. Aspen is its own little town right there. Everybody has to come in from the outskirts. Like your Glenwood Springs and your Basalt and Carbondale and all of those are all bedroom communities that are actually going into that town of Aspen. But nonetheless, they're just coming out and out and out. In fact, I know of people who work in Eagle that drive that road every day to go to work in Aspen.
Oh, yeah. And even Rifle.
Yes, in Rifle. Newcastle, of course, is definitely.
Oh, yeah.
The
They do. And it's, well, and it goes back to something I said at the very beginning. It's like, coupled with the impact fees, the city is updating its housing strategies. Well, I have said, I went to their stakeholder and I'm like, why is it just the city's housing strategy? Why are we not working as a community? And again, the impact of impact fees would come up as part of this overall discussion.
Of course.
And we would look at, how do we still fund infrastructure, but how do we also build homes? And you get a much broader, robust discussion and more innovative solutions. But instead we have not even a Mesa County housing strategy, it's City of Grand Junction housing strategy. So bring the lenders to the table, bring, you know, these people around the table and figure this out. And if you really need more money for infrastructure, which I would side with Councilman Simpson, it's a matter of priorities. If you look at how the city budget has grown, it's not that you don't have the money, it's how you spend your money. But if you really do need it, then make the case to the voters and increase the sales tax. So we're all supporting that, whatever it might be.
I agree. The voters need to, the people as the voters need to have a say in all of this.
Right, they do. And
or maybe be able to understand the budget and say, you know, you could live within your budget if you didn't do this, this, and this.
Well, yeah, and again, you could. I mean, I am sure. And when I ran for council a couple of years ago, I dove deep into that budget. And I mean, let me tell you, there is a lot of room for places to cut, regardless of what people might say. And it's, you know, again, 150 more employees today than we had 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's ludicrous. We have not grown that much. We have not.
No.
The need.
Yeah, the need is not there.
Bureaucratic.
And if the city of Grand Junction wants to provide a daycare center, wonderful. But don't make the taxpayers
pay for it.
Pay for it on the backs of new development. I did ask a question. I'm part of the stakeholder group for the impact fees, representing the home builders. And I asked the question, I said, I mean, how many communities across the state actually charge a municipal facilities fee? That has, if you look back historically, that's been funded with general fund. That's been funded with your sales tax and your property tax. And they said, oh, well over half. And I said, well, I want to see the number. Yeah, we'll get that for you. I'm still waiting. But yeah, we shouldn't have a municipal fee. We should not have a linkage fee. And as they look at these fees for new development, again, moderate it to where we actually are looking at the real impacts and not just driving up whatever it is the city thinks they need for the next 10 years.
Right, because that was one thing that they had. Okay, you've got a magic wand. And you lucky person. And you can go back, you know the budget, and what would you get rid of, and what would you keep, and how would you, and you also have a majority on the city council. Ooh. Yeah, I gave you all the
and
things.
you have a city planner that actually believes in you.
I don't care. I oversee the city manager, so I mean, frankly, that is one of the keys. Though the city the city council has only has a couple of direct employees, and one of them is the city manager. And the first thing I would do is make sure that I have a city manager that understands they work for the people. They must respond to the people, and that they really, truly need to be able to move the community forward in a way that works for the majority of the people, the majority of the time. So that would be one piece of it. Right. But then looking at the budget overall, I'll be honest, and I have friends in the housing division at the city, I'd cut it. We have great nonprofits. Turn around and give them the money so they can go out and build more units. When it comes to communications, the school district has as large, maybe larger budget than the city. They have 2 people in their communications department. We have 4. I would go through each department. I mean, if you take a look, and we haven't even delved into this area, but...
Delve away.
Okay, so the self-performance that the city has done, that they're taking on all these projects. So they have I forget what they call it, a special team. They were originally 18 positions that were part-time to do parks work during the summer, maybe get called in to drive a snowplow in the wintertime. Well, they made those 18 permanent. So that's 18 new positions.
Okay.
Well, now we have to find something for them to do. So we have them paving the bike paths, 9 miles of it, which legitimately should have gone to a private contractor. And we're in, I forget, year 3 or year 4 of doing 9 miles.
The city is now in the paving business.
The city is, they bought a paver.
That's right.
Lord. Yes, that's right. I remember that.
$495,000.
But I thought that was just for odds and ends streets. I didn't realize it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's bad.
So again, it's like, what business are we in as a city? You go back to the basics. What businesses are we in? And what should we basically, get rid of or allow other places to do? And I mean, that would be a big piece of it. And again, city council elections matter. And so if I had a magic wand and I had a majority on council, that'd be great. But those are fleeting, frankly, every 2 years. So we would have an engaged public that is watching. Because I think part of the way we got here was people didn't show up and vote in 2023. 18,000 out of 45,000 voters showed up, less than half. So we'd have an engaged community.
And how would you get the information out about the candidates? I think a lot of times, because my understanding is only 12,000 people actually subscribe to the Daily Sentinel.
Yes.
So
they'll even be less now because they've gone to
Right.
They're going to go digital total, right?
Digital.
Except for 2 days. Yeah.
Right. And so, and a press release from City Council is not any help. So where do you think that the candidates, and how do you raise the candidates? Because I know a lot of people, even Cody says sometimes, this is practically a volunteer position to be on City
a full
Council.
time,
volunteer position.
Yeah.
Which it probably shouldn't be if you stayed in your lane and only took care of the things that you were supposed to.
Right.
But how do you find people that are willing to serve like that, and how do you get the word out that they're different, and that people will actually say, hey, I know what they stand for, and I know what they stand for, instead of seeing a yard sign and go, oh, I recognize that name, I'll vote for that.
Well, I mean, the reality is that if you, first of all, when things like 4th and 5th Street come up, I had a builder actually say that's going to be the Achilles heel of anyone who's running for re-election. They think that people are going to forget. They're not. And so I've seen, frankly, when we do have checks and balances. When a city council or a city gets too far out there, people start to rise up. And I'm seeing that. I mean, and I'm having people, say, how do we get good just like you just did? How do we get good candidates? How do we get things back on, right the ship, with making sure that the captain and the crew are, all rowing in the same direction. What I am seeing is that we have people who are upset with the way things are going. And, what we've got to do is get beyond the I'm upset and pointing the finger and saying, how do we change it? And you have an opportunity with the city council election that's coming up in a very few short months. And I've had more people reaching out than ever. And again, I've been around since dinosaurs roamed the earth, that are saying, who can we get to run? Who can we get to come in and really represent us, and all of that? And so the city is actually doing us a favor, because they're already starting to engage people who say, this is not what I want. So let's do that. And again, it is possible to get your message out. Honestly, social media is a big way to do that. And last time around, even though we didn't see a lot of people at them, there were 13 candidate forums with city council in like, I forget how many months it was.
There were a bunch.
But there were a bunch. So there are opportunities to stand up and tell your story and say what you believe in. And then there is the door knocking still. If you want to get elected, and you get motivated candidates, they're going to go out, they're going to knock doors, they're going to have those one-on-one conversations. So there's a way to get your message out. And there are people that I'm hoping will step forward and say, I can do better. I can do better at representing what the city residents and voters really want, and I'm willing to put myself out there. And I'm starting to find some of those people. So I'm an optimist at heart, and I think it will be a pivotal election next spring. But I think there will be a lot of engagement, and I think we'll have good choices to make.
And how much is money a factor?
In this market, money is not the factor that it is in other places. I mean, granted, we did have a couple of candidates that spent like $30,000, I think, in the last election. But we also had people that spent, when I ran, it was just over $20,000. And with $20,000, you could buy signs, you could buy yard signs, radio advertising, social media, even ran a few television ads in this market. So between 15 and 20,000 is you can mount a strong campaign.
And I think what people don't realize is Jason Baez, when he was on the other day, said, if all of the Republicans gave just $5 to a candidate,
you'd be there.
Yeah, well, you'd be way over there. You'd have money for several candidates.
For several candidates, yes, exactly.
So anyway, and again, I think, so, basically good people need to be willing to put their names out there, and a lot of other good people need to be willing to maybe write a check, but for sure show up and vote. We need to get over 50% participation at the polls for a city election.
And how do we do that? Because how? How do we get people
the out? Magic wand again.
The magic wand. I've got the magic wand, and it's like, you vote, you vote, you vote. But again, if things are going well, it's harder to get people to show up.
That's right.
When people are angry, they show up, and people are angry.
Indeed.
And I think they will show up.
And how much of this can be reversed?
Oh, almost all of it.
Well, and that's good. That's a good sign.
That's a good positive way to look at the whole thing. That it can be stopped.
Seriously, if you don't like 4th and 5th Street and you elect a majority on council, they're like, I'm done. We're done with this. This is not working. I mean, I talked to somebody who bicycles regularly, who rode down at once and said, I'm not going back. It's even dangerous for bicyclists now.
Their stress levels over
In fact, with that in point, I have a social media platform, And I have a friend that was on a social media platform that said that she knew of 3 bike accidents down there, bike and vehicle accidents down there that were the bikers' faults, not the vehicle, since this has been implemented.
It's, well, honestly, you can't see. There's all this distraction with the white poles. But anyway, that being said, if people are angry, they will show up. So I don't think we're going to have a problem getting people to show up. And I think it's a miscalculation on the part of anyone who's running for re-election this time to think that everything's going to die down by next March 15th when the ballots come out.
And that
People
is
will
exactly
remember.
what they think. That they said it's already trickling down. Not as many people are showing up to the city council meetings, and that's why we need people to do that. You want representation that represents you and the values and the majority. You got to show up.
Keep their feet to the fire.
Yes, you do have to show up. And in the meantime, that's the other thing is show up. If there's supposed to be community outreach meetings about 7th Street this fall yet. So show up. And I mean, I usually keep an eye on that. I usually email that out. There are other people, I think you're one of them, that puts that information out there on social media. Show up for those things. Let people know we're watching.
And we wanted to do a challenge to everybody, and that is for the entire election this fall and this spring, we challenge you to write 1 letter a week about something to someone that's important to you. We challenge you to talk to 5 neighbors, 5 neighbors that are experiencing the same thing. How do you feel? And get those people to do something, because it's that, and I think it was, maybe you have to talk to 6. If you know 6 people, you know the world.
Something like that.
And you have to keep those people going. But it's just a challenge, because one thing that I finally thought about the other day, and you know, they always say that conservatives, the problem is the conservatives are working and they have families and they have sports and I thought, you know what? I think most of the liberals are working and have jobs and have kids that have sports. 'Cause I'm looking at some in our neighborhood. So please don't use that as your excuse anymore.
No.
If you want to be represented, you have to make your voice heard.
Well, and the power of speaking to each other cannot ever be understated.
Right.
That one-on-one communication. And I think you're right. It's like, I think there's a strategy out there now for the fall election. It's like, if you will talk to 10 of your neighbors and they talk to 10 of their neighbors, you know, all of a sudden...
And we can't all talk to the same 10 neighbors.
No, you cannot. But again, you know, talk to people.
Right.
Yep. Anything else you'd like to add? Because you've been wonderful. I just really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you. And I thank you so
immensely.
much for having me. I think, you know, that's really, at the end of the day, it's so important to be engaged and to really, it's hard sometimes on that civic platform to get up and you know people are going to take shots at you or write that letter to the editor. But if we're not involved, I mean, that's what this country is founded on, is, you know, we have so many freedoms and we need to protect those freedoms. And the way we protect them is by showing up.
One last thing I just happened to think of. I just want to remind the people that even though we are talking about Grand Junction city government, please write those letters. Please talk to your neighbors, even if you're outside of those city limits, because it all affects you one way or another.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, you've been watching Mesa County Compass. This is the facts as we see them, the truth as we know it. You decide. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Diane,
You bet.
for joining us.
Thank you.